What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of COASTER-net Uncut. I'm, of course, Adrian Marchek from Chicago, Illinois, joined once again by Mr. Attendance Graph himself. Yes, Danny Miller is back here again for another Uncut. We act as if there's been someone else ever. There has been no one. You've always been on every Uncut. So why we keep pretending like it's shocking that you're here? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe because I took a brief vacation and you did some shows with Jeff there. And
yeah, but those are like updates. They were even uncuts. Like, we've never done an uncut without Danny Miller.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we've had some other folks on. I mean, we had Rob Dole and we had Brian Bass.
That was a mistake.
Well, yes, they both were. And, I think we've had a few other folks on. Darkside Dick has made a couple of appearances.
Let's not talk about him. There's no sense in that. So tonight, Danny, as I have just alluded
something that we've done the last couple of years here, Andy, and the apology line is going to start down below.
We're going to get started early here because everyone's favorite Themed Entertainment Association Index came out a few weeks ago. And this is the document that gives us the only numbers that we have in the industry that tells us how many people roughly went to every single park. They rank them top worldwide parks. The Themed Entertainment Association ranks them by North American parks. And we've been doing this show, like you said, for quite a few years now, where we like to look at what these numbers, how they have changed over time. So even if, so let's assume, because a lot of people have issues with these numbers. They don't like these numbers. They're like, oh, they're greatly underestimated or overestimated, and whatever argument they want to make, whatever fits their narrative, they're either under or overestimated. I don't even know what to say anymore at this point. And they're like, oh, well, they're slighting this park and not slighting that park. Okay, whatever. We get it. Okay, you don't like the numbers. But what we do look at is with these graphs, we look at the change over time. So even if you disagree with the specific numbers, if they're off by 1,000 or 2,000, some people are saying they're off by like 2 million. I'm like, that seems unlikely. I'm sorry. Just seems very unlikely at this point that if you're off by 2 million, that
because
nobody.
Kings Island is pulling in 6 million. Because Kings Island is pulling in 6 million guests, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, come on. I got the common sense test going on. I got the 2-eye test going on, and that ain't happened. Unless, and I won't discount this. I'm not saying Kings Island does this. I'm not saying Cedar Point does this. Unless they're counting every single person that works in the park every single day as a member of attendance. We know that some people like the WWE like to do that. They like to count every person working there. Are they counting season pass holders twice if they leave the park and come back in? I don't know what parks are doing. I don't care what parks are doing. I like these numbers. It gives us something to talk about. And looking at the change over time, even if the numbers themselves are wrong, the change over time is still pretty accurate to see how these parks are moving up or down. And everything that happens here makes sense when it does happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, and we do this in the engineering industry all the time. We do, and I think I might have even explained this last time we did this show last year. We do something called finite element analysis, and if you're an engineer, architect or something, you might be familiar with the term. But it's basically a stress analysis of a structure. So in the context of what we do, when we build a forklift and we are updating a model of the forklift that we're working on, we'll do a stress analysis of the tractor frame, the frame of the forklift. And we will do a side-by-side comparison of the old design and the new design, and we'll simulate forces in the same exact way, and we'll compare and see if the new design is better than the old design. The exact stresses and deformations and all of that we get, those numbers are not going to be 100% accurate. They might be in the right ballpark, but we can ultimately, if we do the same analysis on both parts, we can determine if the new design is better than the old design. So we're applying that same logic here. The numbers are probably in the right ballpark, maybe not exactly correct, but it stands to reason that this group that is estimating these attendance numbers year over year is doing it in the same way. year after year. And sometimes they even go back and revise the previous year's numbers a little bit. I think one park they did that this year. So we've updated that in these charts that we're going to show you. But it stands to reason that these estimated each year in a very similar, if not exactly the same manner. So I think it holds water. The argument holds water to say we can look at the growth or decline in theme park attendance year over year using these charts, and that's really what we're looking at. You can ignore the numbers all you want. Honestly, we could even take these numbers, we can take the numbers on the left-hand side on the y-axis, the attendance and guests, we can take that completely off the chart and just look at the trends. And, we could get pretty much all the information that we're going to discuss here. So again, take the exact numbers with a grain of salt here for sure. But as far as the trends and which way the parks are going, I think a lot of this will make a lot of sense. So if you approach it from that point of view, I think you'll find it hard to argue with some of the things we're going to talk about here.
So we're going to look at three separate graphs that we've always done three separate graphs for this. We've done basically a major park graph with your Disneys, with your Universals, your year-long parks, that kind of thing. We've done a regional graph that has some of your local parks, that has like your Knott's Berry, your Kings Island, your Six Flags parks. And then we also have a bigger regional park, correct?
Yeah, so I think we'll do these in this order here. We'll do the national, what I call the national graph first, which is your Disneys and Universals. Then we'll do like a full regional graph, which is going to include your Cedar Fair parks, your Six Flags parks, your Busch and SeaWorld parks, and then also Hershey Park is in on that graph. And then we'll kind of filter out that stuff. And the last graph, which I think is maybe one we'll spend the most time on maybe, is just Cedar Fair and Six Flags. We've taken Hershey and the SeaWorld parks out of that because, back in 2006 when, which is when we have data for, a lot of the SeaWorld parks and the Busch Gardens parks were a lot higher than your Cedar Fair and Six Flags parks. And that has not been the case in more recent years. So it sort of makes some more sense to put those together, for comparatively speaking. But I think Cedar Fair and Six Flags generally are where the most interest is with you and I, and also our audience. So do you want to start with the national graph?
Yeah, we usually start there, and I'm going to throw that up here that we can see, and just some things that might strike you right off the bat. You can once again see Magic Kingdom, Disneyland, very, very high at the top. But the one thing to note there is I think it's important to note what happened last year over the summer with Star Wars. So I think we need to look at those things. So one, remember that at Disneyland, Star Wars opened in like June. So it opened without Rise of the Resistance though. It opened with the Millennium Falcon ride, with all the experiences, all that great stuff. And if you recall, the whole summer, people were talking about how the place was a ghost town. And I'm not even sure when Rise of the Resistance even opened in Disneyland, to be completely honest with you.
It was like right at the end of the year, like it was December sometime.
I know at Magic Kingdom, Rise of the Resistance opened in right around Thanksgiving. We started seeing some test runs of it. And then obviously during the Christmas season, that's when the whole fiasco with the showing up at Hollywood Studios in the morning, getting the reservations, all that great stuff.
Yeah. They opened just at the point where a few people who voted at the end of the Ride Warrior Choice Awards wrote it in for their favorite new attraction of 2019. Just a few, because a few people got to ride it at the tail end of the year.
So, and we do know that Disneyland was not happy with the response of Star Wars opening at Disneyland. And we know that people lost their jobs over this. So it does stand to reason here that they are not showing much growth at all there at Disneyland. So that I think that's one of these things that we look for clues, and maybe that's how they're doing the numbers. But we know certain facts, and this is backed up by that Disneyland had a very poor showing for Star Wars. People lost their jobs over it, and so here on this graph we see that. What other things do you have to point out here on this national graph?
Well, Well, and I think it's going to be interesting, and this is a overarching comment for all of these graphs, but it's going to be interesting to see 2020 and then 2021. You know, the next couple years here, with COVID and then the bounce back from COVID that we will eventually see, it'll be interesting. You know, this is going to be much more than just a year over year here. This is gonna in the next couple years show us how badly the parks have been impacted by COVID, and then the response and the return to parks here. But the big thing that sticks out to me on the national chart is something that we've been looking at for a couple years, and it's the whole idea that major additions at the Orlando parks in particular typically result in about a 2-year spike of growth, of attendance growth. And if you look at the light blue line, which is Islands of Adventure, and go back to 2009, when we had Harry Potter Part 1 open, you see 2 consecutive years of strong growth, and then it starts to flatline. Then a few years later, you look at Universal Studios Florida when they did Diagon Alley a few years later, you see 2 to 3 years of strong, consistent growth there. And now again, if you look from 2018 to 2019, Islands of Adventure, I think the number is roughly 4%. In the growth there, or looks like closer to 6%. But we talk about Hagrid's and Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure opening this past year, so they seem to have some strong growth again from another Harry Potter edition, and it would stand to reason that you would continue to see that growth into 2020, which would have been its first full year of operation. We're not going to see that with COVID, obviously, and the parks being closed for a couple of months, but certainly the indications are there that Islands of Adventure again would have seen strong growth again in 2020. And you can sort of make that parallel to Animal Kingdom as well, which is the orange line, which is now the last couple of years took over 3rd in North America in attendance according to these numbers. And you see the 2-year spike there, which is coming from Pandora and the world of Avatar. And you see the 2-year spike there, just like you see with the blue line from 2009 to 2011, and then that green line from the 2013, 14, 15 timeframe. So you see that 2-year spike from Pandora, and now 2018 to 2019, that's sort of flat line now. So this is, again, the route that we've seen these parks go, where each of these parks gets a little bit of a bump and then they go somewhere else, right? So Disney did Animal Kingdom, and now they're doing Hollywood Studios with Star Wars. They're not going to see that 2-year growth here, obviously, because of COVID, but that's where they were going to go, right? Because that was sort of the lowest park on the totem pole there, right? And then, they're going after Epcot next. So if you look at these progressions and what the parks are doing, they did the Fantasyland expansion and all of that with Magic Kingdom. They saw nice growth for a couple years through there. Then they went to Animal Kingdom with the Pandora expansion. They're finishing up Star Wars here, and Toy Story Land with Hollywood Studios, and now with Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
They're going to Epcot there. They're doing some major refurbishments with Epcot. We'll see what that brings here once we get to true post-COVID. But again, you can see the progression of where Disney in particular has put the money, and Universal too. I mean, you can see the progression of where what parks they throw the money at in a very sequential order, and to sort of, step on top of the last park that was expanded. They're sort of tiering that growth, one park on top of another. It seems like these parks had very, very good multi-year plans across the chains here. So it's really interesting when you think about it from that perspective. I mean, even California Adventure opening Cars Land in 2012, you see the big jump from 2011 to 2012, and then again sustain that growth for many, many years, still climbing at a small rate, but certainly better than it was before Cars Land in 2011 and prior.
Yeah. So this next graph we're going to throw up here are the regional parks with the SeaWorld and Busch parks thrown in too. Like you said, the SeaWorld parks, like they're more of that, national park brand, but their attendance has been dropping so much that they're kind of in the line of a lot of other parks. So if you look here, there's not a whole lot of storyline. We're going to just focus on the SeaWorld and Busch parks right now. SeaWorld San Antonio, Busch Gardens Williamsburg, they haven't even been on the list lately, right?
No, they haven't been on the last couple of years. So, we kind of, for the purposes of this chart, we assume that they flatline at 3 million, which is where both of these parks last were. So we're just assuming flatline. Those aren't actual numbers there, but those are not in the top 20 there. The park that has emerged into the top 20 the last couple years here. Well, first of all, we saw Six Flags Great Adventure emerge into there several years ago. But we've also seen Six Flags Great America, which is that teal line, which has seen a very nice growth over the last several years. In 2012, they weren't on the list yet, but that's when they built X-Flight. It would stand to reason that they had some sort of growth there. 2014, they built Goliath. And then they've continued to add with their different expansions, Joker, Justice League, Battle for Metropolis. But then here, 2018 to 2019, you see a spike there for Max Force. And we're going to see that. You're going to see that a little better on the next chart, which is just Cedar Fair and Six Flags. But it's very clear that Great America was pretty much flatline 2 years ago, but then last year to 2019, definitely a spike. And I think that can be completely attributed to the Great American Bash.
Absolutely.
The Great American Bash taking place there in mid-July. But definitely, Six Flags Great America, if you go percentage-wise, a 2% increase for Max Force, which, is along the same lines as what Kings Island saw for Mystic Timbers, which, for that type of investment, I think is a pretty solid number. And they also did they start doing Holiday in the Park last year as well?
2 years ago. So they've done it for 2 years now. So they've been slowly expanding their season too. Where they, they've had some like Fall Fest stuff, like After Haunt, like in November, some beer stuff. And then they added the Holiday in the Park for 2 years now. So they've been slowly adding different events to get more people in the park at different times.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as the SeaWorld parks go, too, SeaWorld Orlando, which is the navy blue line, which starts up at the top, they saw a decline, like many of those parks did through the whole Blackfish thing. Saw a nice, rebound last year and then, or 2 years ago. And then last year, almost flatlined, a slight increase. Their big new attraction for last year, which, Infinity Falls, right, didn't open until September. Yeah. So really their brand new water ride didn't really open until, past peak summertime. So I know it's Florida, but still, not much of an increase there. I guess that's not surprising. SeaWorld San Diego did some big expansions, and then they sort of calmed down a little bit. They did Electric Eel, but they saw a big spike, and then they kind of came back to where they were a few years ago. Kind of hard to tell what's going on there, to be completely honest with you. It seems like Southern California doesn't know what to do with SeaWorld.
Well, and the thing is they've been kind of switching from that, hey, we're a zoo, to hey, we're a theme park. And I think that's going to take some time to really take hold in San Diego. And maybe with the addition of Emperor, that looks like a fantastic roller coaster, maybe that will finally push them over into that theme park category. And we'll see we won't see for a while what happens there. But hopefully that will finally push them into that, hey, this is really a theme park, not a zoo. And we'll see how that affects attendance overall.
And it'll be interesting, again, on the national chart, we said we'll see how much these parks have been impacted by COVID, but it'll be really interesting to see what parks will sort of come back more quickly because we know Busch Gardens Williamsburg and SeaWorld San Antonio and, Busch Gardens Tampa, all the SeaWorld parks have additions sort of waiting in the wings here. So, to open, so we'll kind of see how those go. Whereas, some of these other parks, either have additions that, they, have postponed, like Great Adventure. Hershey Park ended up opening their ride for 2020. So it'll be interesting to see if you look at the orange chart here, the orange line, which is Hershey Park, they saw a really nice spike back in 2012 when they opened Sky Rush. Haven't really opened a major coaster since then. I mean, they've done Laugh Track and a few other small things. But in 2019, they just did the refurbishment of the dark ride. So it would have been real interesting to see if Hershey Park would have seen a Sky Rush like spike in 2020. We're never going to know that. But I'll be curious to see how Hershey Park's 2020 and 2021 numbers look like, having chosen to open their new ride. Same thing with Kings Island here. I'll be curious to see what those lines look like choosing to open their new rides in 2020 compared to like a Great Adventure and the SeaWorld parks, which are electing to wait until 2021.
Well, let's
so
switch
that'll be something
over.
to look at.
Let's switch over to the next graph then. That way we
Right.
can kind of see some of these places that we're talking about a little bit better. So this graph now has taken out the SeaWorld stuff. And we're basically focusing in on the Cedar Fair parks that are on the list, the Six Flags parks that are on the list, and we've added in Hershey Park there as well. So this gives you a better idea of what these, because on the other graph, all that stuff is kind of like smushed together because SeaWorld Orlando used to be so high and then it kind of dropped. But this graph really shows you a lot of the trends throughout the Six Flags and Cedar Fair chains. So like the first thing you can clearly see there is at the bottom is like you were just saying, that rise of Great America with those huge spikes across those years. You can see how dramatic those spikes are. And when we start saying, why are parks investing in certain places? Well, chains invest in the parks that are going to show the most growth. And you can see that with those investments with Great America, because Great America went so long without major investments. You think about the time when they put in Deja Vu and V2 in the same year, they did all the water park stuff, and they kind of just like forgot about the park. And then with X-Flight and Goliath and Joker, and it just seems like it's just been coming year after year. And people are like, well, why is Six Flags keep putting money into Great America? Well, there, folks, is the reason. That's exactly the reason right there. And you see a very similar trend with Great Adventure. Even though Great Adventure, I don't feel has invested as heavily as Great America has, right?
No, I mean, they did Joker in there. They did Justice League more recently, and then Cyborg. I mean, the last 2 or 3 years, Great Adventure hasn't had tremendous growth, but prior to that, they did, which is real interesting because they did Green Lantern back in 2011. But they really haven't done anything significant the last several years. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a big spike coming with Jersey Devil. We'll see how that goes. But if you look at Great America, Great Adventure, and then Six Flags Magic Mountain, which is the purple line here, you see very similar growth among those three parks. Magic Mountain, you look at the spike in 2015. I mean, you're looking at Twisted Colossus there. You can look at these charts and sort of pinpoint the major additions from year to year. Magic Mountain just saw some increase, and Magic Mountain also went to 365 a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the other things that's at play here. We talked about Great Adventure and Great America also extending their seasons. They've been doing Holiday in the Park the last couple of years, so I think that's also sort of evident in here, which is maybe why you see some of the Cedar Fair parks starting to dabble in that as well. Hershey Park's been doing that for a number of years. So we'll see, Magic Mountain didn't really open their 2019 ride in 2019. So it makes sense that they didn't really see a ton of growth. 2020, all bets are off, obviously. You can see a little bit better with the green chart here, that spike in 2012 from Sky Rush on Hershey Park. And then, steady growth year after year, a slightly better growth in 2015 with Laugh Track, perhaps. So it would have been real interesting to see what the 2020 number would have been in a normal year. The other thing that really stands out for me here, and if you look at Cedar Point, again, 2018 saw a nice spike with Steel Vengeance. They've sustained that growth through 2019. 2014 is the outlier there because that was your water main break year. In a normal year without losing, 3 days of operation, essentially, that that number is probably somewhere in between the 13 and 15 number. So sort of suspend disbelief a little bit there. But the big thing that sticks out to me here again is if you look at the yellow line at the top, Canada's Wonderland, 2007 to 2008, big spike when they built Behemoth, right? All the parks sort of went down in 2009. We had a recession there, right? Climb back up. 2012, you build Leviathan, big spike there in 2012. And then, a little bit, it goes down a little bit, and then you start to come up a little bit again. 2019, 4% growth with Yukon Striker. So the three B&Ms that Canada's Wonderland has built over the last 12 years or so, we've seen significant attendance spikes in those years. I mean, if you look at if you take the numbers as gospel, in 2008 you see a 4% increase with Behemoth. In 2012 we saw a 5% increase with Leviathan, and then again another 4% increase in 2019 here with Yukon Striker. So Canada's Wonderland certainly seems to be benefiting from spending the money on big B&M coasters because they've seen significant spikes with all three of them.
Now you look at the black line and you look at Kings Island, and we've been telling this story for a few years now, and people still don't believe us when we tell this story, but the proof is in the pudding here. Kings Island has a slow, steady growth regardless of what they put in. So if you look at, Banshee was what, 2014?
2014, they saw bigger growth the year after.
They saw bigger growth the year after. You see Mystic Timbers in there, a slightly better growth. You see last year, they're still going up. They put in Antique Cars last year. So to me,
and they also started doing Winterfest in there too, the year that Mystic Timbers went in.
Exactly. So to me, if I'm looking at where to invest in parks and I see these huge spikes at Canada's Wonderland, and I said, hey, we got a 5% growth here with a B&M. We've got a 4% growth with a dive coaster. And then I'm looking at Kings Island and I'm saying, well, we're only showing a 1% growth when we put in Antique Cars, but we see a 2% growth when we put in a big GCI or a big B&M. So in my mind, if you're trying to actively decide where you're going to put stuff, to me, Canada's Wonderland seems to be like the no-brainer, that you can see spikes there up the wazoo. Plus, you're talking about, raising an already really high attendance level park. So I'm a little bit befuddled as to why Kings Island is why. So like they put in Orion this year. I'm not talking about how good the ride is. I'm talking about the financial aspect of why you would put Orion there. And now with the rumors that we're going to talk about probably later on this week, with the rumors of now seeing more land markers going in, of possibly putting in another coaster there, I don't know if these numbers justify it. I just don't know. To me, if I'm a businessman, I'm looking at this graph. To me, it looks like we're getting growth no matter what we put in. So why spend $25 million on a roller coaster if we don't have to? We can put in Antique Cars and see the same amount of growth. That's my thinking. I don't call me crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like the big $25-30 million B&Ms are giving you better growth at Canada's Wonderland for sure. That's certainly one place you could invest. I mean, and it's tough because we don't know what the other parks look like because we don't get numbers. And again, people like to refute these numbers, but if the numbers were that far off, if the numbers were that far off, and if the numbers were actually better than what these numbers indicate, wouldn't you think the parks would come out and sort of dispute that and say, well, our numbers were actually this, they were better than you're estimating. Yeah. So the numbers can't be that far off. And if they are, the numbers probably aren't much better than these reports seem to be. So for the purposes of the discussion we've had here tonight, I think these are really interesting things to look at. And again, like you said, the Kings Island train just keeps on rolling. You can put in a big roller coaster. You can put in Antique Cars. And again, I'm not saying Orion's not a good ride. Orion's a fantastic ride. Does it make that park better? Absolutely. Does it make that park more well-rounded? Absolutely. Does it make me want to spend more time there than I did last time I went? Absolutely. It's another ride that I want to ride several times while I'm there. However, in general, you don't see the big spikes that you see in other parks when you put in these big roller coasters, and even when you put in these big additions. I mean, if you look at the Red Line, Knott's Berry Farm, 2015 Voyage to the Iron Reef, and then the Ghost Rider refurbishment are some of the things you've done in the last couple of years. And the Calico Mine Ride and Timber Mountain Log Ride refurbishment. I mean, they've put a lot of money into restoring old rides that have been there for quite a long time and redoing parts of the park. And that formula seems to be working quite well for Knott's Berry Farm. So maybe that's something you continue to do.
And it seems for Knott's Berry is adding different events. Their hunt is big there. They've done the Boysenberry Festival that's taken off. So Knott's is kind of following that Disney model of refurbishing old stuff, making it new again, making it so that it's more modern, but then also adding in all those events that are going to draw people in, especially season pass holders, and get them to spend more money when they're there. So
yeah, I completely agree. So I think there's lots of good stuff here. I think this has been a good discussion here. And I certainly think there's a lot to glean from this. And this discussion is going to change completely next year. If this report even comes out, who even knows if they'll be able to, estimate attendance. I don't know what their process is.
Would there even be a point in it at some point? Like we know everything's down. Like it's almost ridiculous to even, because like Canada's Wonderland being so high on the graph isn't even going to appear on the graph because they haven't even opened yet. So it's at some point there's no reason to even put out numbers for next year. And maybe it's just a matter of to see 2021 to see how far places have come back or have fallen or haven't been able to regain. So maybe next year we won't do this show, but definitely the year following that, if we're all still alive, maybe we should do that show because it might be more fun. So as always, thank you for joining us here on COASTER-net Uncut. Hopefully you have enjoyed our little discussion here. And if you got complaints about the numbers, don't even bother because I'm not responding. I'm probably just going to delete your comment. So there you go.
And you may get blocked if Andy's in a good mood.
If I'm in a really good mood, you can get yourself removed from the channel forever. So as always, I am Andrew Barczyk from Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
Right on, right, Warriors.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.